Mostern. I'm an associate professor in the Department of History, and I'm also a member of the Faculty Assembly, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. The purpose of the event is to have a conversation where we as faculty can explore some issues about the union campaign that is currently underway, and to discuss the impact that a union is likely to have on our jobs and on our workplace. Let me introduce the panelists in the order that they'll be speaking, which is also the order in which you see them on the stage. We have Jennifer Lee, senior lecturer in the writing program, Carl Redwood, part-time adjunct faculty in the School of Social Work, Marian Jarlenski, assistant professor in the School of Public Health, Tyler Bickford, associate professor of English, and Mrinalini Rajogopalan, associate professor in history of art and architecture. Everyone on stage is a Pitt faculty colleague and a member of the union organizing committee who supports the union and is well-versed about the issues. We also invited Chancellor Gallagher, Provost Cudd, and Senior Vice Chancellor for the Health Sciences, Levine, to join us this evening or to send representatives. But as you can see, they have declined to participate. Still, we hope that people will feel free to express a range of perspectives tonight, a variety of viewpoints, so that you can all make the most knowledgeable and informed possible decision about the campaign. We'll begin by allowing each panelist to speak for about 5 minutes. After that, we'll have time for an open conversation. You can make your way to the mic in the front of the room, and if you do, please limit your comment or question to about 30 seconds so that we have time to hear from everybody who might want to speak. If you do that, we encourage you to introduce yourself. If you would prefer to ask a question anonymously, I think you all received index cards as you walked into the room, and you can write a question or a comment on the index card, raise your hand, you can make yourself visible to one of our friends from the United Steelworkers who you'll see around the room, and they'll deliver your cards up to the front of the stage, and I'll be happy to read them anonymously. With that, let's begin, and I would like to welcome Jennifer Lee.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Jennifer Lee. I'm a senior lecturer in English, where I teach both in the writing and composition programs. I've worked at Pitt for 20 years, over the course of which I've taught more than 15 different writing courses and upwards of 2,000 undergraduate students. For 15 of those 20 years, I directed the English department's teaching practicum, training some 300 graduate students to teach Pitt's required writing course, seminar, and comp. That I've benefited from being in the right place at the right time, that I've had allies among tenured and tenured student faculty is not lost on me. That's not to say I'm not a very fine teacher of writing or to diminish my contributions to both undergraduate and graduate education here at Pitt, but to acknowledge that my career successes have had a good deal to do with luck and the goodwill of those who have power over my working life, and that I recognize how fleeting those conditions can be. I'm aware of the precariousness of my position and of the precariousness of people in positions like mine. I can see that the luck and goodwill I've enjoyed has not been evenly or fairly distributed among my NTS colleagues, people whose work is equal to mine. I also know that the benefits I've enjoyed can be rescinded, that as readily as I can be given things, they can be taken away. For many years, I was so grateful to be making my living reading, writing, and teaching that I willingly overlooked the inequities around me. I wanted to believe in my own exceptionalism, but eventually the sheen wore off, and it became impossible not to see and feel the disparities. That an assistant professor in my department is hired in at roughly $30,000 more a year than I make after 20 years of teaching at Pitt, while I make twice as much as an adjunct with the same course load as mine. For the past 20 years, I've sat in renewal and promotion meetings in which some of my colleagues are afforded great leeway in their student evaluations, while others are not. I have colleagues who teach part-time, thoughtful, and deeply invested teachers who juggle several jobs and have been refused classes because their schedules don't readily, quote, fit the needs of the department. Colleagues who've gone up for promotion and been denied because, so the dean tells us, the criteria have changed. This year I'm up for renewal, and while I believe my colleagues in the English department will support my case, I know that this may not be enough. Teaching at Pitt means a great deal to me. There are so many days when I'm inspired and enlivened by the work, Yet there are also days when I feel resentful and fearful. For a long while, I thought this too was the natural state of affairs. But over the course of the past year and a half, as I've talked with my colleagues across departments and across ranks, as I've learned about what faculty unions at other universities have accomplished, I've come to see my work here a bit differently. Which is to say, I've come to see that I deserve to be paid equitably for the work I do, to earn a salary commensurate with colleagues who teach the same classes, who research and write while I teach an additional course each semester, who mentor students and contribute to the department in numerous ways, just as I do. That a $30,000 or $50,000 a year salary difference between us is neither natural nor inevitable, and it certainly is not just. I'm working to help form a faculty union here at Pitt because I want to have the terms of my employment articulated clearly and applied fairly, to know that the process of renewal and promotion has integrity, because I want a conversion process whereby people who have been teaching part-time at Pitt for years are eligible to move into full-time positions. Until it began helping to organize a faculty union here at Pitt, it didn't seem to me that such things were possible, but in fact they are. And now
Hi. I've been teaching here on and off for more than 25 years. Usually I taught one course, and sometimes I taught two courses. Sometimes I had a full-time job besides this with benefits elsewhere. Sometimes I had a full-time or a part-time job without benefits elsewhere. The jobs I had were in social services, so none of the jobs I had while teaching paid high salaries and wages. As an adjunct, most of us need better pay and benefits. During the 25 years of teaching, I received raises only 3 times. There may be adjunct faculty who don't need the raises. I've talked to adjuncts in the law school who donate their pay back to the law school, but they are paid more than $100,000 at their law jobs, and some well more than that. My contracts have always been for 1 term. Usually I don't receive the offer of employment until 2 or 3 weeks before the term starts. There have been times where 2 or 3 weeks before the term starts, the class was canceled because of lack of enrollment. Also, my Pitt ID expires at the end of each term, and the new term ID is usually not available until after week 3. There's not enough space for adjuncts. In the School of Social Work, there's no adjunct office at all, and there used to be an office that was shared by about 40 adjuncts. So when we meet with students, we meet in the hall, we meet in the student lounge, we meet in Starbucks or somewhere like that. We have to find a place to meet with students. These and other issues like these have existed for more than 25 years. It's not like these were not known to the administration. It's been raised many, many times, but nothing has been done to really correct them. And some of the things are very easy to correct, actually. As adjunct faculty, we are the lowest priority here at the university. The union will allow all of us to work together. Adjuncts, part-time, non-tenure stream, and tenure stream, to focus around creating the best teaching conditions in all of our classrooms. The union is the way for adjuncts, faculty members, and their work to be respected. Thank you.
To come out tonight so that we can discuss the issue of unionization. My name is Marian. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Health. I am probably the most junior person here, so it's my privilege to talk to you all tonight. And I'd like to just share my experience and perspective on why I signed a card supporting the organization of and collective bargaining by the University So first, has anyone ever seen that bumper sticker that says the weekends brought to you by unions? Because that's basically why I'm here. So I think that sums it up nicely. But in the big picture for me, I think the ideal picture is to negotiate a university-wide workplace environment that actively values transparency and equity. So those are the two themes that I want to touch on from my perspective tonight: transparency and equity, not mutually exclusive. So I'll tell you a little bit about what those mean to me. Transparency. So those of us who work in the soft money environment, the schools of the health sciences, are required to spend the majority of our time running a research program that is extramurally funded. And I perceive a lack of transparency in our salaries and in the hard money that might flow our way in terms of a startup package or mid-career funding, both of which are crucial to keep the research program, to grow it and to maintain it. There's a lack of transparency sometimes around promotion and tenure, who is appointed to tenure stream and why or why not. Effort reporting, maybe some of you in the room have been to one of those effort reporting workshops and are kind of scratching your head about how that all adds up in terms of our time. So I think transparency on these topics, we can negotiate clear ways to increase transparency that I think will enhance our research enterprise and enhance our contributions to advance human health without careening into a sort of scarce resource, zero-sum mentality that frankly is counterproductive to the advancement of knowledge. I also think that improving transparency will assist in making progress on equity in the university. And I just want to say a couple words about gender equity. So I'd like to say to each and every person here tonight, if you feel like there are gender inequities in pay, promotion, leadership opportunities, responsibilities, course loads, you are not alone. A lot of people perceive some gender inequities. I'm sure we're all aware of the Provost's report on gender inequities in pay. I've seen some data from the School of Public Health showing that males are overrepresented in tenure stream appointments and in terms of the ranks of full professor. Gender equity issues, they're hard to tackle, but we will organize, and we are organizing to try to make progress on these issues in a positive way. In fact, there's a fledgling women's committee that is formed as part of this organizing effort, and I would invite anyone who's interested in that topic to think about joining that. So I'd just like to close by saying that I consider it a privilege to come to work each and every day at a world-class institution like the University of Pittsburgh. I'm not here to complain, but I'm here because I think that if we organize, that maybe we can make things even better.
Hi everyone, my name is Tyler Bickford. I teach in the English department here at Pitt. I'd like to make two points. One is about shared governance, and one is about why we're working toward a union that includes faculty at all ranks. Shared governance, I think the better term here is faculty governance. I think that was a term that circulated more a generation ago. But shared governance is something that I personally value very much, and I think is important to how universities work. I serve as the secretary of the Budget Policies Committee of the University Senate. I serve on the Graduate Council in the Dietrich School. I'm the director of graduate studies in my department. And all of those are things that I could say no to. I effectively volunteer an enormous amount of time to participate in these activities, which sort of go under the banner of shared governance. Because they're important, and because faculty governance and faculty running the university really is what it means to be in a workplace and in a community and an organization that reflects a set of values that I think we all share. So one question that people sometimes have is, what's the relationship between a union and shared governance? Or we already have shared governance, we already have universities in it, so why do we need a union? And one incident has clarified that for me very much since I've been here. In 2013, the Faculty Assembly formed an ad hoc committee whose responsibility was to work on issues related to non-tenure stream faculty. So there was a recognition that the university had grown, and it had grown entirely off of the tenure stream, that the ranks of part-time instructors and full-time non-tenure stream instructors had increased dramatically. Many members of the community were concerned about that. The Faculty Assembly was concerned about that and decided to address it in an appropriate way by forming this ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee had a membership from across the university, had membership that reflected different ranks. The ad hoc committee spent well over a year doing intensive fact-finding, consulting with a wide range of stakeholders from across the university, from the health sciences and professional schools, the arts and sciences and the regional campuses, and slowly and deliberately put forward, developed a set of recommendations. They developed these recommendations, and then they consulted on the recommendations with the Faculty Assembly and with the administration. They revised those recommendations in light of those consultations. They eventually produced a final report of recommendations, which was then accepted by the Faculty Assembly and then also accepted by the Senate Council, which includes administrators. And through that whole process, they developed a set of recommendations that were about one page. They were very flexible, but they also would have reflected a significant improvement in the transparency and predictability and equity of the process for renewing and promoting non-tenure stream faculty and just for sort of clarifying the working conditions of non-tenure stream faculty across the university. So that whole process, which involved thousands of human hours of work, and which to me is exactly how things should work, developed these recommendations. The recommendations were accepted by the administration, by the organs that represent the faculty, and then those recommendations were put in a drawer and never seen again. So we have all seen the administration at this university decide that something is important, and they're going to implement it across the board, across the university. When the feds say that all faculty need to sign away their rights to their intellectual property, the university, at the drop of a hat, requires us all to sign away our rights to our intellectual property. When the Middle States Accreditation Agency says that we have to have a culture of assessment, every unit in this giant university within a few years has intensive assessment procedures in place at every level. I spend a lot of time filling out charts, spreadsheets, assessing my program, and we all do that. So we know that when the upper administration decides that something's important, they're able to implement it. But when the Faculty Assembly and when representatives of the faculty go through exactly the procedures that are supposed to exist to address the real urgent problems that we see and get buy-in from every level, there's no next step, right? Effectively, the recommendations, you can find them online. They're there. They haven't been implemented. One way I know they haven't been implemented is that I knocked on a lot of doors for this union. I've knocked on doors for chairs of departments, and I often ask the question, what are your renewal procedures like for non-tenure stream faculty? And the answer is very frequently, renewal procedures? What renewal procedures? I don't know. So there are no procedures. So shared governance doesn't actually produce the outcomes we want it to produce. That process I described, I think, is a good process, but it's not actually producing the results. So the question that I think I would put to you is, if we want to see outcomes like that, if we want to see procedures like that actually result in changes in our community, right, then how can we make those procedures stronger and actually make them effective? And I think the only answer to that is that we have to come together in some way and increase our power, right? We have to say that these procedures have to be meaningful. In the interest of time, I won't go into why I think the union supports that, but I think the real question here is, we see these procedures, we believe in deliberation, we believe in these democratic procedures, and how can we actually make them strong? And I think if we work through this, the answer has to be, we have to develop some independent source of power, and in my view, a union is that. I also want to quickly say, a number of people ask the question, why are we organizing tenured faculty and non-tenured stream full-time faculty and part-time faculty all together into the same union? People are familiar with unions of adjuncts or unions of lecturers, and they're less familiar with unions that encompass faculty at all ranks. Those unions certainly exist at research universities. And there are tenured faculty members who say, I absolutely support a union for adjuncts or a union for full-time non-tenure stream faculty, but I don't think it's appropriate for the tenure stream. And also, to be fair, there are adjuncts or there are lecturers who say, I don't know that I trust my tenured colleagues to actually stand in solidarity with me. And so there are reasons that we might have questions about why we would all join into a single organization like this. I'd like to say that there's a positive case, but there's also a pragmatic case. And the positive case, briefly, is that over the last generation, higher education has changed dramatically, and it's primarily changed in the increasing stratification and hierarchy of the faculty, right? Pitt has grown, but the tenure track faculty have not grown, right? So universities are now characterized by these 3 tiers of faculty. That clearly is what has made our institutions, what has disrupted our institutions, what has made our institutions more corporate and more top-down, is this kind of divide and conquer strategy that administrators have used against the faculty. A union that includes everyone is really the only way that we're ever going to push back on this generational kind of effort and bring people back together. So if we say, if my colleague like Jin Lee or like Carl Redwood, if we say that we are all doing the same work, then we need to actually put that in practice, and we need to say that we all have solidarity with each other and we're working together. So Jen mentioned a path to full-time for part-time faculty. A union that includes everyone would make that straightforward. We can have one contract and it can be a straightforward thing where part-time faculty are eligible to be hired into full-time positions. Or we should also say that it should be a straightforward thing for full-time non-tenure stream faculty to have access to the same protections for academic freedom and for their participation in shared governance that the tenured faculty do. And one contract for everyone is the most straightforward way to accomplish that, as opposed to having separate unions that would entrench these divisions rather than erode them. But the pragmatic case is that Pennsylvania labor law is a little bit idiosyncratic, and the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board has a long-standing preference for large bargaining units. It doesn't like fragmentation is the term that they use. And we can anticipate reasonably that if just the adjuncts at Pitt or just the non-tenure stream faculty at Pitt went to the Pennsylvania Labor Board and said, we'd like to form a union, that the administration would say, well, that would fragment the faculty. We have all of these tenured faculty too. And the Pennsylvania Labor Board would likely agree with that take and would say, everybody has to be in the unit. So in effect, we're working in a statutory environment which suggests to us that the only way we can actually achieve a union for anyone is to work toward a union for everyone. So I'd like to say, and to say this very clearly, that if my tenured colleagues, if you support a union for adjuncts at Pitt, and if you support a union for non-tenure stream faculty at Pitt, that the only way we're going to achieve this is through this effort in which we all have a union. And so if you think that's a good goal, and even if you don't wish it for yourself, the only way that we will achieve this tool to improve the working conditions of all of our faculty and this tool to increase the sort of equity and just success of this institution is to have a union for everyone. So that may not be true in every state. It seems to be true in Pennsylvania, and that's a really important fact that we should share widely. So those are my comments. Thank you.
My name is Rajogopalan, and I'm an associate professor here at the Department of History of Art and Architecture. And I too want to address the theme of transparency and how a union can help us get to a more transparent and shared governance system. But I want to do it by specifically addressing the aspect of tenure, and I have 2 points to bring up about tenure. The first concerns the process of tenure, and second, the institution of tenure. So before I begin, let me say that I am a tenured professor here in this department. My perspective is someone who I speak as someone who is both very grateful to have received tenure, but also as someone who has witnessed many colleagues in other departments excludable to them. And just to reinforce Jennifer Lee's point before, these are people who are equal, perhaps better researchers and teachers than me, but they happen to be, unfortunately, in dysfunctional departments and were evaluated on aspects of their personality or things that had nothing to do with their research or teaching. So I see myself as part of that lucky few who have made it, and herein lies the problem. So first, let me talk a little bit about the process of tenure. Despite Pitt's claims to be a public university, its tenure process does not match that of our peer public institutions. In true public universities, a candidate for tenure has access to some, if not all, of their tenure files and is appraised of their progress as they advance through the system. This is not the system at Pitt, where tenure candidates cannot read the letters that have been solicited by external commentators or learn about the votes in their department. In public universities with unions, should a candidate be denied tenure, they have a recourse to a system of lawyers who can match the heft of the university's legal system. Losing tenure at Pitt means having to defend oneself in court, pay legal fees for years, many times when you're on unemployment checks, and finally mediate out of court and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The opacity around tenure at Pitt has turned it from a system of due process, one where professors are meant to receive promotion based on clearly stated and agreed upon terms of advancement, to a system of patronage. In other words, instead of earning tenure based on one's merits and achievements, a professor receives the privilege of being tenured due to the benevolence or good-natured collegiality of their superiors. This is not a system of promotion, it is a system of patronage, where the increasingly small number of elites, and I would count myself now in this group, tenured and full professors bestow tenure and promotion, but can also take it away at their will. It is a system of patronage that fundamentally undercuts our mission as a teaching and research university and our future aspirations to keep growing as such. Unions can keep a real check on this and return tenure to a more open, if not more fair, system of evaluation and assessment. My second point follows from that of what Tyler just mentioned, which is protecting the very institution of tenure at a time that it is under threat in universities around this country. It's clear that over the last several years, tenured lines are becoming more and more scarce at Pitt, even as adjunct and contingent faculty sizes grow, or faculty strength grows. Several successful programs, like our Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies program here at Pitt, have no difficulty having students, both graduate students as well as undergraduate students, but they're staffed almost entirely by adjunct or contingent faculty lines. Besides affecting students and the adjunct faculty in very real terms, this imbalance has repercussions for tenured faculty as well, who increasingly have to take on more and more service obligations because they are the only ones there. Those numbers are shrinking, and we have to all do wear these multiple hats. And these considerable demands of service have to be juggled with ever-increasing expectations of research and tenure, as Pitt rightly competes with other universities to raise our national and international profile. Again, a union can put the brakes on the system of erosion of tenure, on the systematic erosion of tenure. It can help by insisting that the administration recognize the labor of faculty who make this institution a university and not a corporation. Equally, a union will remind all of us faculty about how we are indeed part of a larger ecosystem, and that we tenured faculty do not profit from the economic marginalization or indeed any other kind of marginalization of part-time or adjunct faculty. It is actually the reverse. A union will give us the apparatus to let the administration know that we stand together, and more importantly, that we will fight together. Thank you.
Let's thank all of our panelists again for their wonderful commentary. that they'd like to make, please make your way up to the microphone, or perhaps if you have a loud voice or a small enough group, you can raise your hand and speak from where you're located in the audience. And again, a reminder that if you'd like to make an anonymous comment, you can write it on a card and make yourself visible to our United Steelworkers friends who can pick a card up. So, any questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you all very much. I have a simple question. Do we know which union busting company the university has hired, or which companies, how much they're paying them, and how much that comes from public funds?
With the union contract, we'll be able to demand transparency in the finances.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'll try to do this loudly. I'm Cindy Tananis. I'm the Senate Secretary. I was one of the people who served on the ad hoc non-tenure stream committee for a total of, I think it was 6 years. It felt longer, but I think it was a total of 6 years that we worked. Much of what Tyler said was true. We certainly looked at policies, procedures across the university and found them lacking in terms of promotion and working conditions for non-tenure stream faculty. But Tyler, I need to correct you.
Please.
Because I think it's important to get the facts right. The recommendations that came out of that committee were hard fought. I mean, it was hard to get them, it's hard to come to them. And we shared them very much with the Provost's office. And the Provost's office was working in parallel at the same time, not with the committee necessarily, but in parallel, to also gather information from the schools and departments and so forth in the Provost area. They came up with some of the same findings we did, and a number of those recommendations were taken care of and addressed very well by the Provost's office. I'm in communication right now with an associate provost specifically around another one of those recommendations and asking about the status. I'm happy to say that they've been responsive. I wouldn't say that they respond as quickly as I or other members of the original committee would have wanted. But to say that they went nowhere, they went into a drawer and were never dealt with, is very much incorrect. There is also a Senate committee right now that was formed as a result of that ad hoc committee, the Faculty Affairs Committee, that is responsible in large part for following through on those recommendations to continue to ask the question, what is the status, what's being done? That is not to say that I either endorse or don't endorse union activity. I'm just trying to clarify the facts around that non-tenure stream committee. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or others may have about that committee.
May I respond very briefly?
Yes, sure.
Cindy, thank you for that. And put it in a drawer may have been too strong. What's important to me is that I believe the recommendations were adopted in 2015, and it is the case that the central recommendation from your committee was simply that there should be procedures that are well advertised for the renewal and promotion process for non-tenure stream faculty. And it's the case that 3 years later, that simple requirement has not been implemented across the board at the university. So there are things like one of the recommendations was that there should be a path to promotion, and that seems to be spreading. That's correct. And that's important, though. I think it's important to say that after that whole process, 3 years after that process, there are still departments at this university that simply don't have written procedures that are disseminated at all for merely how people will be renewed when their contracts expire. So I don't think that contradicts anything you just said.
No, and just to follow up with that, I would say that you're absolutely right. One of the problems that was identified by that committee was the fact that because we are such a decentralized environment in the university, each of these units has been independent for a long time in terms of how they respond to these issues. Trying to get them to come together and then move together is obviously a major chore, perhaps something the union might be an option to consider. But the provost office, what I'm saying is the provost office has made that clear to the departments and to the schools and centers that should be there.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the university could move much faster. They can turn a little switch somewhere and make sure I have an ID on the first day of class. Not a big thing to do. They haven't moved on that. Back in the day, there was this term, all deliberate speed, like we're working on it. That's what they keep telling us, we're working on it. But I've been there for 25 years and they've been working on it, but we really haven't seen the results. We need some power to kind of equalize out. Recommendations are good, but we need a way to negotiate in a clear way with the university administration to make sure the recommendations have some enforcement possibility to them.
So I have some comments on cards from the audience, and I'd like to see if our panelists want to respond to a couple of those. One of them is, how will having a union affect my ability to bring in grant money or hire research staff? Do you want to take? Yeah.
Okay. I hope I'm qualified to answer this. You may be thinking this person is too junior. I have one NIH grant, just full disclosure. That's a really good question. I think in terms of attracting grant funding, if you think about the peer review process, I don't know that there's any effect, right? I mean, it's based on the qualifications of the research team, preliminary data, those kinds of things. So I don't think that having a faculty union will proximally affect that. If you believe that unionization will stabilize the research enterprise, then maybe you would think over the long term that it might increase our competitiveness to apply for grants. The other thing is, one of the other research universities that has a faculty union is the University of Florida, and I collaborate with some colleagues who are at the University of Florida, one of whom I know turned down an industry, pharmaceutical industry job to take her appointment at the University of Florida because she felt that the job security and stability was actually better there at the University of Florida. In terms of hiring research staff, I don't see that there's any connection there. Again, except for the connection with startup funds or bridge funds, if you want to be able to maintain your research staff and to understand. From my perspective, it's terrifying to think that if I can't get my grant renewed, I won't be able to, I'm going to have to let someone go. So if you think about organizing for more transparency and advance notice for startup and bridge funds, it could help maintain research staff through the lean times. That's my perspective, admittedly, as a very junior person.
Thanks. Let me read all. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm an undergraduate student here at Pitt. I'm really excited about the unionizing efforts that have happened with faculty, and I'm also especially excited to see the women's committee for the union. And so my question is asking you to talk a little bit more about how a union can help increase diversity and inclusion and equity for gender and across the board of anyone from a marginalized community.
Great, thanks.
I'm going to speak to part of it and then hand it to somebody else. One of the things that happened at the inaugural meeting of the Women's Committee was, we talked a lot about sort of the issues that disproportionately affect faculty here because of race, gender, class, sexuality, etc. And what became really apparent was that we are also isolated from each other. So one of the ways that I think it's going to make a huge difference is that we may actually be in conversation with each other. And I mean, that is one of the sort of stratagems, is to keep us apart from each other, not talking to each other, not sharing experiences. And in the course of that small meeting, many stories emerged of harassment in the workplace here at Pitt, and they were stories that have been kept very close. So by people who did not feel that they were safe in their departments, that the powers that be would hear them or do anything about what had happened to them. So I think that's one way that it could make a real difference.
Yeah, I think it's also important to look towards forming a civil rights committee as a part of the union. Right now, black students at the University of Pittsburgh are only 5%. We're 13% Allegheny County, 13% of the nation. Black full-time faculty is only 2.7%. So those numbers are way too low and they need to be brought up. What the committee can do as a part of the union is help raise awareness and also look at the comparison of the University of Pittsburgh with other universities. There are a few studies that have been done that have given the University of Pittsburgh a D in terms of outreach and reaching out to black students and black faculty. We can do much better.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, it's very interesting. I'm in the School Public Health, so I'm always thinking about places that we're advocating for in public health, and that the American Public Health Association supports in policy statements, and things like breastfeeding, being optimal nutrition for children, and thinking about could we do a better job of having clean and private lactation rooms. Don't get me started on paid family leave. I think that should be a national policy, but I think there are some very concrete things that we can change, and I hope that will translate to the students. I mean, the other thing that I'm sure you're aware of as a student was the results from Pitt on the survey a couple of years ago about sexual assault among the student population. So it's something that needs, we need to keep conversation flowing.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a really important question you should bring up, and I think that it's one that's been ignored among many other issues of equity. In the massive and somewhat heroic efforts of the union over several years, Kelly, you might correct me if I'm wrong, we found the gender pay gap to be quite great at the University of Pittsburgh, and this is partly because the women faculty are overrepresented in the ranks of adjunct, part-time, contingent, labor. So one-on-one, if you compare ranks, the faculty salaries seem not to be so different of a male assistant professor and a female assistant professor, a male associate professor and a female associate professor. But what we're finding is that women faculty are not being promoted to associate. They're being promoted even in lesser percentage, dramatically lesser percentage, to full faculty. So they're not making the ranks of full professor. And this is quite shocking at an institution that prides itself on, or has aspirations again to be a R1 university, which I fully support. But you know, the demographics is such that we're looking at a class of workers that is almost entirely female at the lowest rungs, and then they're at the top almost entirely male. And this is a huge problem, and we have to fix it. So we have to fix it soon.
So the full professors at Pitt are 74% men. Lecturers and instructors are 58% women. Just to build on what Lina just said, it's not just that women aren't being promoted, but in fact women are being confined to a permanent subordinate position, right? So lecturers and instructors it's important that when we benchmark our salaries against our peer institutions, our top ranks are normally have comparable salaries, and our lecturers and instructors are always at the very bottom of our benchmarking groups. So if we recognize that lecturers and instructors are significantly comprised of women, and we also recognize that those ranks are underpaid, then that's a real problem. I just want to connect that to a point Jen made, which is that contingency, right? Not having a predictable contract and not having protections against arbitrary dismissal. Contingency creates or fosters cultures of harassment and of abuse, right? So if people with subordinate status know that the people that they're interacting with will be able to make a decision about whether at the end of the year they'll have a job, whether their contract will be renewed or whether they'll be promoted, or whether they'll receive another contract in the next semester for part-time instructors, then that has, of course, it has a silencing effect. And so people who are victims of abuse or harassment or discrimination are also in a position where they're systematically being put in a position where they aren't empowered to report those incidents because the people who are actually abusing them are, able to vote to fire them, in effect. So contingency simply isn't compatible with the work that I think all of us are invested in ending as, cultures of harassment and abuse and discrimination in universities.
Next, I'd like to read another question that came to me anonymously on a card. Will tuition increase if the faculty forms a union?
Say yes, it will, and it will anyhow.
So we're trying to rethink the culture of this institution and how this institution is organized. So I like to say that one way to think about this is that we should be thinking about keeping the money in the classroom. So again, we have large numbers of objectively underpaid teaching faculty at an institution whose largest source of unrestricted funds is tuition. And those teachers are, if you just think about the budget of one teacher in a classroom with 35 students, and those 35 students are paying on the order of $17,000 or $30,000 a year, for 15 credits, then that teacher is bringing in enormous amounts of profit for their work, right? Now, of course, an institution is expensive, and there's a lot of places for that money to go. But I firmly believe that the work we're doing is in solidarity with students and is very much about supporting the core of this institution, which is especially teaching faculty and their relationship with students. And so the way we should be thinking about this is we're keeping all of that tuition money in the classroom and investing in teachers and investing in that one-to-one personal relationship that instructors have with their students.
And fortuitously, the next question I have on our card here perhaps follows up exactly on Tyler's comment, which is how much money is being spent on Ballard Spar's lawyers, and why is this a beneficial use of money?
That was a good question.
Does anyone know the answer to that? I think we know that so Ballard Spar is the law firm that the university has retained already on behalf of their fight against the grad student union campaign, and is, according to the law firm's website, is a $500 an hour firm. So how many hours they have already spent and what the terms are of the contract, I'm not sure if any of us on the panel know. The people who might be able to answer that question, unfortunately, are not with us tonight.
All of these questions about money, one of the problems is that you're asking us and we don't know the answers, and we've been asking the university this. And the assumption is that there's no money. Pitt sits on top of a very healthy endowment. They are legally bound to spend the revenue generated from that endowment. We don't know where that money is going. If we have a union, or when we get a union, one of the things that the university has to do is when they say we don't have the money, we can say, well, please open up your books and show us where you don't have the money, how you don't have the money. And I do think that this is something that we need to hold the university accountable for, that we're all very intelligent people, students, faculty, staff who work in this institution of higher learning, and I don't think that we need to accept in blind faith this sort of idea that there is no money, and that a union is going to be the thing that squeezes students further, or the union is the thing that is going to drive students further into debt. I think it's a false zero-sum game that is in the interest of the university to perpetuate that myth, when in fact tuition has been steadily rising at the University of Pittsburgh. I've had students who have had to drop out because they can no longer afford to pay their fees, and we're not seeing any of that transfer into prosperity or even fair wages for the faculty. So I think that this is a myth that needs to be debunked, and again, it needs to be debunked by everybody, including especially the students, I think, because it's very unfair that they're being told that story.
As you were talking, Min, I was thinking about two things. One, that for many of us, our salaries have not even kept up with the cost of living, our salary increases, and that an adjunct faculty member makes about $13 an hour. So I think that's something that should be known, $13 an hour.
Thank you. I have a number of more questions that have come to me on index cards, but I also want to make sure that anyone who's looking to stand up and ask a question or make a comment has the opportunity to do that before I move to the next card. Yes?
I just have a question about the money. So, of course, I would like to believe that in an institution that states the value on diversity and inclusion would actually make decisions for faculty based on those values. But I'm hearing what several of you saying that that's clearly not the case. But I think, and I understand you're also saying that the money decisions can't be known by us because there's no transparency. And I think that for this to be successful, there has to be a conversation about return on investment, right? So while we can't know what the budget is and why the money's not there where it's going, surely we must be able to look at other universities that are successfully unionized to assess the impact on their budgets. So of course I believe that reducing inequities and increasing equality and inclusion will serve our students the best, right? That is excellence. And also improve our research. But that's sort of conceptual and abstract, and I'm curious to know how we can break that down by looking at other universities and get beyond the abstract and to the information of money. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great question, and it's very important, right? It's true that money doesn't grow on trees. So one thing we can do is that we do know that when faculty at institutions organize, in their first contracts, they win big raises, especially for people at the bottom ranks, right? So for that to be possible, that money has to exist, right? And certainly that's not debt financed or something, right? So it's the case that when faculty have organized, they've won big raises for people at the bottom ranks. And I think that's important. I think another way to think about this, though, is that it's also, importantly, not actually our job to be the chief financial officer or the accountant, right? One of the dynamics at this institution and institutions like this is that it's easy for people at the top to not invest in diversity and equity and people at the bottom ranks, because there are no systematic forces pushing them, right? So administrators, the chief financial officer, the president have all sorts of forces pushing on them from all sorts of directions, right? And they have politicians, and they have, their bizarre corporate boards, right? And they have all of these other groups kind of telling them, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. And they don't actually have anyone making their lives difficult and saying, you also have to do this. And so I think the right way to think about this is not that we're the accountants and that we have to actually make all the money work, but rather that we appropriately can advocate for ourselves. And that the missing link in the politics of the university is bottom-up pressure on administrators. And so again, that doesn't require magical thinking, and it doesn't require saying that money grows on trees, but it does recognize that the current sort of power structure of these institutions is such that it's easy for administrators to make decisions that ignore the financial needs of the faculty, especially the teaching faculty. And a union will create a structural force, right, that requires administrators to actually take into consideration and to, have their lives be difficult if they don't take into consideration the financial needs of faculty in the body.
Absolutely, but I want to make sure my question is heard. I'm not saying why does this make sense from a financial standpoint. I'm saying how can we arm ourselves with data to make that argument as well?
I'm wondering if perhaps our friends from the USW might have some information about this from other campuses?
Hi, my name is Robin Sowards. I'm an organizer with the USW and a faculty member at Chatham University. The university's audited financial statements are available online if any of you are looking for some exciting reading. The CFO's website has them published, and those do give sort of the hardest numbers you can get. Budget numbers, remember, are prospective, so they're always a little bit fuzzy. The audited financial statements are independently audited by an external third party, so those numbers are meaningful. What those numbers indicate is a little trickier because they're not broken down in the kind of fine-grained detail we would want to do the kind of data analysis you're talking about. But it's certainly the case that at the University of Pittsburgh, there's an enormous, roughly $2 billion budget every year. Virtually every year they run a very large budget surplus, and that surplus is not getting sort of reinvested in faculty salaries or something. It's going into endowment, it's going into new construction, it's going into more administrators with more salary, and so on. The sort of trends you see at Pitt are relatively common in that respect. And like in other institutions, tuition increases have never been driven by increases in costs. They happen every year. It's like the return of the salmon or something, right? It's just part of how the system is built. It's like cyclically increases tuition. And so that means they're making a decision about their business model that continuously produces, at the end, student debt. And so the goal has to be to alter that business model. And I think Tyler's point is exactly right. The way you affect that is by creating institutional pressure from faculty, because it's faculty that are invested in students, right? You guys are the ones in the classroom with students. You care about their success. You care about them being able to survive financially when they leave this place. And faculty, therefore, should be in a position to advocate for students and to push back against the decisions about how they allocate money that result in a continuous increase in tuition every year on to infinity. At other institutions, I've looked at some data about tuition increases elsewhere. It's a little bit tough to correlate just because if you want to get really apples to apples comparisons, the comparison class is pretty small. So there's 34 institutions that are public, R1s that are in the AAU. Out of those, 14 of them have faculty unions, but those faculty unions sort of differ in scope. Some of them are just part-time faculty, some of them are just tenured faculty. If you really want an apples-to-apples comparison, you would need a case where you're looking at a wall-to-wall faculty unit, and it's a symbol to R1, it's not a community college or something, right? And that's Pitt and 4 other institutions. At that point, you're actually looking at kind of a small sample. I don't see any indication of those institutions that unionization particularly affected tuition one way or the other. the numbers I've looked at, but again, it's such a small sample, it's actually very difficult to generalize from that data.
Another thing to think about, and I will think about the literature in this area. I mean, I'm thinking of like labor economics literature, but I think a corollary to the university union would be other professional unions. So like the federal government employees have a union, tons of researchers in the federal government, and state level public sector unions. And I'm wondering if there have been any studies of what happened in terms of efficiency or state services sort of before and after the right to work laws in the states occurred. So I think that is an example, that would also be a good example to think about real world data that might be comparable. So that's my thought. I don't know the literature. I don't have it here at my fingertips, but it's something to think about.
Thanks. Any more questions from the floor? Yes.
I was at a meeting today where I heard someone say that medical school faculty would not be involved in the union. Could you speak to that?
So there have been multiple efforts to unionize the faculty at Pitt since the mid-70s. In the campaign in the mid-70s, there was a complicated process where there were 5 bargaining units defined by the Pennsylvania Labor Board, the Arts and Sciences, and the professional schools, and others, and one was the medical school, and the medical school faculty voted in for themselves a bargaining representative whose platform was not to bargain. So, in effect, from the perspective of Pennsylvania labor law, the medical school faculty are already unionized, or something like that. And so then in subsequent union efforts, like the one around 1990, the labor board ruled that remained in effect, and that the appropriate bargaining unit for Pitt would be basically everyone else. So that's a great question, and the answer is, I think, just historically contingent, right? There was this other effort, and the medical school faculty took this particular approach.
Next, let me ask another one of the questions that came to me on an index card. How would merit-based promotions be affected by unionizing? Right, essentially the tenure process as it exists now, I guess is the question.
So I think that the promotion and tenure, there's going to be a lot more transparency, and really depends on what we put into our contracts. But besides salary, this is something that has come up over and over again as a concern and preoccupation for many faculty across the board. And this is something that we can write into our contracts as to how much transparency every department wants or needs to have across the board. But I think the very real and pragmatic aspect of unions, as I spoke before, is also just the sort of, it's a very real system of checks on an administration or senior faculty who are in many departments on this campus operating behind a sort of a veil of secrecy. And having a faculty union means that we can actually ask for the tenure process and the promotion process to be based on very open and legible forms of advancement or ranks of advancement, and then we can hold the faculty accountable for that. So it's very important that that is included into our contracts. And other universities, Rutgers and University of Florida and University of Oregon that have unions have very explicit terms and conditions worked into their contracts about tenure and promotion. So this is something that has been done, has been tested. There are models for this, and there's a system that works with the union much more efficiently and more fairly.
I'd like to speak to that too. In terms of promotion in the non-tenure stream, we have no sort of say in what the terms, what the criteria are. And last year, something was added to the requirements for promotion to senior lecturer, and it was something like significant expertise in one's field. And when we asked the administration what this was, and we asked because people were being denied promotion, the only answer we were given was that it was writing a textbook. But of course, NTS faculty are not required to publish. I mean, historically, that's not been part of our work expectations. So that was the only explanation we were given, and otherwise it remained this incredibly mysterious requirement. So to have some say in how we're evaluated and the terms of our promotion, and to know what those terms actually are, it'd be fantastic. Objective metrics, yes.
One of the other questions I have before me is on the same topic, or related topic, so let me throw that in here. Also, how will we attract and retain faculty if salaries are standardized?
So first, salaries will not be standardized. That's not what we're aiming for, because there's a common misconception about unions. We're not setting ceilings for anything. The union will not be setting ceilings. They will simply set a sort of a floor so that in order to kind of raise people up. We fully recognize that in order to be a competitive research university, we have to attract talent, and talented professors often compensate them for rank and expertise. The individual departments will have enough leeway to do that. So again, I'm going to revert back to the examples of the University of Oregon, that in their collective bargaining unit gives the union gives the department the right to reward or to compensate and to make offers, to individuals who they believe will provide some sort of service or exceptional privileges or bring expertise that the department needs. So what we're doing is we're raising that bottom and regulating that bottom, but we're not setting a ceiling, and we're by no means advocating for a sort of a flat, one-size-fits-all contract. I mean, that simply will not work, and it's not what we are going for, and it's so the standardization is a myth that simply isn't true.
It's also the case, attract and retain talented faculty also means attract and retain talented teaching faculty. It's the case in my department. We hire something on the order of 50 part-time instructors, adjuncts to teach every semester. And in August, it's actually an incredibly difficult task to attract and retain part-time instructors to teach our courses, right? And so it's important to also say that we're currently struggling to attract and retain teaching faculty in our departments because, of course, the salaries and working conditions are not at the level. I think it's worth making a note at this point, actually, about process also, which is that so right now we're collecting authorization cards. We will take those authorization cards to the Pennsylvania Labor Board and petition to have an election, and then the Labor Board will run a secret ballot election, and if a majority of the people who vote in that election, vote in favor of bargaining collectively, then the university will be required by law to sit down at the bargaining table and negotiate with us. A bargaining committee that represents all of the constituencies of the faculty will survey our peers and to come up with our sort of goals and priorities for bargaining. We will sit down at the table with the administration and we will hash out the terms of what will be a complicated contract, right, with a big diverse faculty. And then when the bargaining committee comes to an agreement with the university on contract language, we will then take that contract language back to the entire faculty, and the entire faculty will vote on whether to adopt that contract, right? So
Oh my God.
Bring it down the house.
Yeah. So that all just gets to the point. So Minna is saying that we are not sort of fighting towards standardized salaries, but importantly, it's also not just what the people at this podium are fighting towards, right? So we all, as the entire body of the faculty, will actually democratically decide whether to adopt a contract that itself will have been bargained in a representative and democratic way. At the bargaining table, the administration will have, in effect, every opportunity to have their own positions put forward, and so if an administration priority is things like being able to reward research faculty with high salaries, they will be able to advocate for that. And if, for some reason, the administration agreed to a perfectly standardized salary scale, and if for some reason that's what the bargaining committee also fought for, then when it went back to the faculty, I don't anticipate that the Pitt faculty would themselves vote in a contract with a perfectly standardized salary scale. So it's important that this whole process actually has lots of voices and lots of perspectives built into it. And so when Minna says we're not fighting for that, that's true that the people actually working to organize this union are not pursuing that as a goal. But also, it's important that it's not just our goals, right? So what this contract actually looks like is going to be something that's decided by the whole faculty in conversation, dialogue, negotiation with the administration in a democratic way.
Thanks. Let me call again for questions from the floor. Yes.
I'm Tom Sucker, I'm the School of Public Health, and non-Tenure Street, but anyways, that doesn't matter. What is a realistic timeline? What's going forward? So you have a card writing campaign. Where does that stand? When does it need to be completed by? If that were successful, when would an election be held by secret ballot? And if that were successful, when could bargaining begin? What are some potential timelines here that are realistic?
Great question, thanks.
I'm like the bow tie guy here. I'm just kind of a geek about this stuff, so I've been trying not to go very much. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good question. So we're collecting authorization cards. We started collecting them in January of this year. The individual cards expire after 12 months, and so January is kind of a deadline for us. And we anticipate having enough cards to file for an election at the end of this year. And then the process of actually getting to the election is a little bit uncertain because there are sort of hearings and negotiation with the university. And often employers like to take the opportunity to drag things out because there might be momentum and then if you can slow things down. And so I think we can't make promises, right? But I think it's possible that you could have an election in the spring of 2019 if we filed for an election in January of 2019. It strikes me as probably more realistic that that election would happen in the fall, given that there are legal things that might happen. And then once you have the election, then, right, you have to form a bargaining committee and actually sit down and start bargaining. And that process will also probably take time. So when are we looking at actually having a contract implemented? I think on the order of a couple of years. But you could imagine if we had an election this spring or fall, and then we spent, several months bargaining, you could imagine having a contract in 2 years.
might be a good segue into one of the other questions I have on a card here, which is why is the faculty organizing with the USW union, and why was the USW chosen by the faculty organizing committee?
Yeah, I think people have been trying to organize a union here for some time. Actually, many years ago, there was a committee that was put together, mainly starting out of the English department, I believe, and they started talking to other faculty, and they went around and talked to different unions about who might be the appropriate union to help represent us. And the Steelworkers has an academic workers association where they organize faculty on other campuses, and also this is the headquarters of the Steelworkers here in Pittsburgh. So those two things together helped the committee at that time to decide to work together with the Steelworkers Union to try to pursue representation by the Steelworkers. But the Steelworkers represent academic faculty at a number of different places, including in Canada, and other academic workers. And I think Point Park, some other universities here are also organized by the Steelworkers.
And another question, what would you say to those worried about losing university benefits or pay were the union to renegotiate contracts university-wide? Will a rising tide really lift all boats or come at the expense of my colleagues?
I think one of the things Minna mentioned already is our job is really to bring the floor up for everyone and not to put limits on where we can go. The union will not bring down any kind of, bring people down at all. Everyone can look to go forward from where we are. And actually, once we get into the negotiating process and the election process, the university can't take away stuff. And that becomes the floor that we start from and try to build on that floor.
In terms of benefits, I think it's really important to note here that the benefits that the university offers currently, and I'm talking about family leave policies, health benefits, and the tuition remission for spouses and children. These are actually not legally binding as they are currently written. They are recommendations, and again, to go back to this term that I used in my own talk, they are privileges that the university is granting, and they can take them away at any time. A union would allow us to actually put those into a contract to say that these are benefits that have to be given to faculty. So, I mean, I think that, in fact, the danger of losing benefits is greater without a union, especially in this climate of increasing corporatization of universities. So I think that it's imperative now that we need a union to lock the benefits into place, make the university legally bound to provide things such as health care and family leave and such. So it would actually have an effect of securing those benefits for us rather than us losing them.
That's a really good point, right? Like that we're all actually we recently lost. We used that there was a defined benefit pension plan at this institution that, as of 2 years ago, I think, was disappeared with no announcement and with no deliberation. So we actually do lose things. But one thing the question, there's some language in that question said if all of our contracts are renegotiated, and sometimes there's something employers like to say, which is that we might start from scratch, right? And then we might lose things if we form a union, if we are actually sort of renegotiating everything from scratch. But the process actually is not that, right? So if we go into bargaining, what in effect will actually happen is that we'll lock in the status quo for the purposes of bargaining, and then from the status quo, we will bargain, new procedures here or increases there. So it's not, and the bargaining process is not, we throw out all of the existing policies and procedures and employment practices and actually rebuild everything from scratch. The bargaining process is, we take the existing policies and procedures and employment practices, we actually, in effect, lock them in and treat them as a contract, and then we negotiate from there and we make individual changes. So it's important to say that we're not actually going to renegotiate every contract in the sense of tearing them up and starting over.
Any more comments or questions from the floor? Yes.
I know I've spoken once before, but I'd just like to mention something that I hoped I'd be able to ask Provost Cullen. She's new to the university. A lot of people I know are very glad that she's come. And part of the reason they're glad is because on her website she says that she is an accomplished teacher and scholar whose research explores themes of oppression, economic inequality, capitalism, and gender. Now, I know for someone who works on those things that it must be difficult to move into a university wherein you inherit policies that were put in place before you arrived. But in the context of that research, you are surely aware of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in particular, Article 23, Part 3, which says that everyone has the right to form or join a trade union to protect their interests. In the light of her knowledge of that, does she support the policies of the university to seek to deny the implementation of that right, both to graduate students in the recent past and to faculty now?
That's a great question, thank you.
We're just gonna, I'm gonna have to look up her work and start citing it.
Will the union make us go on strike?
The union can't make us do anything.
Yeah, I think also as faculty, we are the union, and there has to be a lot of as we negotiate, let's say the administration wants to cut our salaries and doesn't want to help us move forward. The very last option we have is a strike. There's a lot of steps before that. And a strike could never be authorized unless it's authorized by you, the members of the union. So the union is not something out there. The union is us, and we have to meet and argue with each other or whatever we got to do to figure out what the next steps are. And as we do that, then when we go forward as a unified body. But a union can only be authorized by the members, and the members have to vote on that, and that is actually a last resort.
Yeah, I mean, my friends and colleagues who work for the federal government have only ever had work stoppages because Congress failed to pass federal appropriations. So that's a great example of a professional workforce that's unionized, that this concept of work stoppage doesn't typically happen. Perhaps I'm naive, but I think it seems to me that in an educational institution, it would not come to that.
I feel confident that when we sit down at the bargaining table, the university will, the administrators will happily agree to our demands for a tenure stream for teaching faculty and for job security and full-time parity wages for part-time instructors and for investing urgent resources in hiring women and underrepresented minorities into the highest ranks, and for enforcing the grievance procedures. And so this administration, which cares about diversity and community engagement and everything else, they just need to reflect their values, and we'll sit at the bargaining table and they'll give us everything we ask. We don't need to.
And in fact, 98% of USW contracts are negotiated without a need to strike, so 98%.
Great. Last chance, any questions or comments? At that, let's thank all of you for participating. Thank our panelists one more time. So as you've heard, we're on our way to petitioning the State Labor Board for an election. Our plan, as you've heard, is to file in January. If you wish to sign a confidential union card, we do have a table right outside the door at the entrance to this hall. If you would prefer for greater confidentiality, you can, well, it's all confidential. Your card will go straight to the USW office, from there to the State Labor Relations Board. Nobody will see it. However, if you would prefer not to be seen signing it here, you can also go to the website at pittfaculty.org, download a card from there, and sign it. And with that, let me thank you all for participating and wish you a great night.